Good evening. Sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Henke Yunkins. I'm the director for the Indonesia AI Society for the Regulation and Ethics Directorate. I thank you all for joining us for the second AI Ethics Dialogue Forum. This is a series of discussion that aim to explore the challenges and opportunities of AI from various perspectives and contexts. Last July, we had our first discussion where we learned from a lawyer from Japan, Mr. Hiroyuki Sanbe. He co-wrote the Japanese AI white paper, and we discussed, he spoke about his experience about principles, framework, and best practices of AI governance in Japan. Today, we have a different theme, quite an urgent one too, I think. The theme today is Singapore approach to AI governance and the impact of generative AI regulation. The discussion regarding this theme is crucial, as we have witnessed last few months the emergence of generative AI technologies such as deepfake, ChatGPT, and synthetic media. ChatGPT is the fastest growing to 100 million users compared to any other application, the internet-based application that we had in the history, I believe. These technologies do have the power to create new values and innovation, but also pose significant risks and challenges for our society, such as the causes on misinformation, privacy, security, and accountability. Our hope is today's discussion will help us understand AI from ethics and regulation perspective. We also hope that this discussion will inspire us to take concrete steps in advancing proper AI governance. This initiative do require the participation and contribution from all of us, policymakers, business owners, industries, academic lecturers, researchers, and AI users. We all do have a stake in the future of AI, especially for Indonesia. We need to bridge the gap between the current state and the ideal state of our law and regulation in AI. To do this, there are several steps that we need to take. First off will be conduct a comprehensive assessment of existing legal framework. Then we do need to engage in a multi-stakeholder dialogue and align our national strategy with international standards and best practices. We understand that these steps are not easy nor straightforward, but they're necessary and urgent. And this is why we are here today, this afternoon, to learn from each other, to exchange ideas and find solutions, as well as build partnership for a better future with AI. We are honored to have our distinguished speaker today with us, and who will share his insight and experience with AI regulation and ethics from Singapore. Pak Matias, can you take it away? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Pak Henke, about this event. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second Indonesia Artificial Intelligence Society Dialogue. We had our first discussion with Mr. Hiroyuki Sanbe, learning about AI from Japan perspectives. In Japan, just published their own political parties AI roadmap suggestion, and it is quite a stepping stone to establish more concrete and strategic AI policy in Japan. And Sanbe elaborated that the importance of governing AI is to balancing between the innovation and also the some part of risk mitigation to preserve the human rights position. And that is the aim of Japan in creating AI policies in their country. And today we'll be learning more from Josh from Singapore, since Singapore is acknowledged from several of quantitative data, for example, a Global AI Readiness Index and also Tortua AI Readiness Index as the top 5 most country with the proper governance and innovation growth in the world. And currently, Singapore is the #1 ASEAN in terms of country who implement AI within their society's lifestyle or life activities. So it is really important for us to learn from Josh about his professional perspective regarding the how to govern AI and the approach of the Singapore for AI, how they can balance between the innovation and also some part of the AI risk that that should be mitigated. And the purpose of this discussion is to ignite the initiative from all stakeholders, from the governments to the private sectors to the communities and university academics, in order to achieve a better governance in our country, according to our ultimate goal to achieve the Golden Indonesia 2045. And one of the goals set by the government is to establish independency for information technology consumption developed by local developers. So there is a perspective of innovation, local innovation assistance from the government side, but also we have to address some part of the risk that should be mitigated in order to carve out the if negative risk and to foster the positive impact of AI in our society. So Josh is currently works as a managing director for the Future of Privacy Forum. He was a former legal policy manager for AI governance in the Personal Data Protection Commission, and he also sit as director and founding chairperson of the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation and Technology Association. He's also a member of Singapore's Law Reform Subcommittee for Robotics and AI. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Josh to share his thought about some parts of the governance of AI in Singapore and what is the impact of the AI that we should anticipate in the near future, not only from the Singapore perspective, but hopefully from the Southeast Asia countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias. Hello everyone. Selamat siang. Apa kabar? Nama saya Josh. I had to dig back into my memory to try and recall how to do greetings in Bahasa Indonesia. But it's really good to see everyone today. And I hope that over the course of this presentation, please feel free to ask more of your contacts and people to join the call as well, because I think we'll all benefit from this discussion together. Now, I mean it when I say discussion, because I don't want this to be a very formal, a very solidified kind of discussion where it's just a one-way street that I'm sharing a very formal kind of presentation. I'm going to try and treat this more conversational in a more discussion-based manner. So please feel free to ask questions, and I really look forward to having a proper dialogue later on. I mean, after all, this is called the IAIS dialogue forum, so I think it should be a two-way street. Now, thanks also to Matthias and to Henke for that very warm introduction. As Matthias said, I am the managing director of the Asia Pacific office of the Future of Privacy Forum. So that's a global nonprofit, and we focus on privacy, we focus on data protection and emerging technologies. Of course, AI is one of them. But before I came to the non-government sector, I was in the government itself. So the main thing in the last, from 2019 to 2021, I was in the Personal Data Protection Commission of Singapore, PDPC, which is the Data Protection Authority in Singapore. And that is also the body that is essentially overseeing the governance aspects of AI in Singapore. And so I'll be tapping on my experience during that time, what I've learned, what I've seen, and hope to be able to share some of that context with you and what are some of the initiatives that Singapore has been doing. I also want to say this. It is a real privilege to be able to be here to share my experience with all of you from Indonesia. I don't see this as a Singapore or Indonesia thing or a Malaysia. It's not a country thing. I think this is a whole of Southeast Asia topic. And I think it's important for all of us in Southeast Asia to work together, to learn from each other. Because I don't think, as much as Matthias has said that, Singapore has been ranked and all that, I think in Singapore, the main thing I want to say is that we don't have the idea that, we want to be first in ASEAN on AI governance. The idea is that whatever we do in Singapore, we make sure that it works for Singapore. And whatever, I hope that this presentation, through listening to it, you will be able to get some ideas that will be able to enhance Indonesia's approach to AI governance as well. So you'll find the model that is best fit for purpose for Indonesia and that provides the best value for your citizens. So that's the angle that I want to say. Okay, so now with that, let me start to share my slides. Okay, just a quick check that everyone can see my slides. Boleh ya?
Yes, I
Okay,
can
good.
see it.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Now, where is it? Okay, so the first few slides are about FPF, so I will skip that. Now, I want to set the overall context for AI governance in Singapore. AI governance does not exist as just a separate concept that is separate from everything else. For those of you who may be following things in Singapore, there is a national AI strategy that was developed in 2019. Okay, so as part of this strategy, the aim is to allow Singapore by 2030 to be a leader in developing and deploying AI systems in key sectors in a way that really provides greater value to society, to citizens, and to businesses. And in order to get to that stage, there are five main what we call ecosystem enablers, right? Things like talent and education, having good partnerships, having a strong and robust data architecture, and also international collaboration. But last but certainly not least, having a progressive and trusted environment. So the notion behind a progressive and trusted environment is to put in place a good framework for AI governance and potentially AI regulation as well, so that we are able to provide a trusted environment, right? So that AI adoption can grow. So that is the context within which AI governance exists in Singapore. But the national AI strategy also didn't pop up just from anywhere. As early as 2017, 2018, there were already discussions within the Singapore government about how to deal with AI. There was this thing called a regulators roundtable where they brought together agencies from not just the data protection side, but also from the intellectual property side, from the Prime Minister's office, from the legal officers, the legal institution, from places like the police and so on, all of them to come together. If there is an agency that is interested in AI, they would come into the regulators roundtable and they would discuss about now the next steps going forward. So that was the genesis really of discussion within the Singapore government on AI. And this started as early as 2016, 2017. So as part of this idea of a progressive and trusted environment, you can see that there are really four legs to this chair. Okay, and so that is going to be the bulk of what I share today, the four legs of the AI governance framework in Singapore. The first leg is the Model AI Governance Framework, which is pretty much a document, and I can share that with you all later. The second is a research program. The third is an advisory council on the ethical use of AI and data. And then the fourth is an AI Verify Foundation. So I'll explain more of that in turn. Let's go into the Model AI Governance Framework first. The Model AI Governance Framework, now, many countries in the world, they've developed their own documents, right? And in the period from about 2016 to 2019, you really saw a huge, significant acceleration of these documents. Every organization in the world, whether it's a multinational company, it's a jurisdiction, or it's a government, it's a regulator, it's an international organization, they were all coming up with these ethical principles. So at the time when Singapore was looking at this, they realized that yes, there is a need for a document to set out what is Singapore's position with regard to AI regulation / AI governance. But they also don't want to be a copycat of of these other jurisdictions, because Singapore can come out to say that okay, these are its own ethical principles with regard to AI. But ultimately, we have to realize that Singapore, as a very, very small country, is a price taker. We are not a price setter, right? Our AI development scene in Singapore is very, very small compared to the likes of China, the EU, and the US. And even for AI deployment in Singapore, at that time in 2017, 2018, it was still very nascent. Only a few companies were really adopting AI at large scale. And these were more of the well-resourced, big companies. The SMEs in Singapore were not really adopting AI at that point in time. So the question is, what can Singapore do to really add value to the international conversation while doing something that is really meaningful to Singapore? So in typical Singapore style, the idea was, okay, let's do something that is pragmatic. something that is practical, something that organizations can use. So eventually we landed on the idea of a model AI governance framework, which I'll call the model framework for short. And if you want to download it, you can use that QR code on the screen. I don't know whether it's clear enough, but in any case, if you type it on Google, you will find it. So the model framework, what it does is it distills some of the common ethical principles that we see from documents outside of Singapore. We find the ones that are most common, the ones that are most relevant, and then we adopt them. And then after we adopt them, what do? We convert them into practical steps, practical recommendations that organizations can take across the entire AI deployment lifecycle for AI systems. Now, bear in mind the word deployment, not development. So this is focused on the deployment side of things, because again, as I said, the idea is for greater AI adoption. So let me just pause here about the model AI framework first and set a bit more context, right? The realization very early on from the government was that AI carries risks, yes, but a lot of the conversation is about risks, but not many people realize the opportunities as well, the benefits. So ultimately, there is a need for a balanced regulatory approach that balances and incentivizes innovation, that encourages companies to adopt AI systems, adopt innovative ways of doing business, yet at the same time providing some guardrails that could deal and mitigate some of the risks that are involved. And in order to do that, you need to adopt a light touch regulatory approach, right? Rather than adopt a hard regulatory approach, which is to introduce AI regulation immediately, because they don't want to scare away businesses trying to innovate using new AI systems. And the whole idea at the time, again, remember this is 2017, 2016, 2017. The government felt that there wasn't a good understanding yet of the risks involved in using AI systems. So paradoxically, in order to better understand the risk, you need to actually adopt AI first. You need to use AI in your organizations. You need to use AI widespread in the country. Then you can understand some of the risks involved. So again, this is a light touch regulatory framework. So this leads to the model AI governance framework. So the model framework, light touch, it's voluntary. Organizations can choose not to use it. They can choose to use it. But the selling point to them is, look, if you use it and you get to show that you show to your consumers that you're using AI in a responsible way, then you can make that as a unique selling point. You can make that as your own comparative advantage, right? Consumers will likely trust your organization a bit more, and therefore they will want to use your AI systems, use your services, and then you win compared to your competitors, right? So across the 4 life stages of AI deployment, and these are the 4 stages here, looking at internal governance structures and measures, determining the level of human involvement in AI decision-making, operations management, stakeholder interaction, and communication. Now, this is the second edition of this model framework, but I think the overall frame is still relatively unchanged. So I was involved in drafting the second edition. So the first edition, I think some of my predecessors did it, but the structure really remains the same. Internal governance structures and measures, you need to have these decision-making structures within your organization to decide on whether even to use AI, what to use AI on, to what extent you want to train your people. Are there policies and decision procedures that the organization can adopt? Are there existing governance structures within the organization that they can adopt to form kind of like a decision-making body or committee within the organization? So that's the first one. Then the second one is determining the level of human involvement, because I think a lot of focus for AI systems at that time was about recommender systems. AI systems that can recommend decisions, that can potentially make decisions for you. That's the focus, right? That was the great thing that machine learning systems were able to promise people, what deep learning systems were able to promise, right? Classification, decision making, and all that. So when you make a decision, how can you see what is the appropriate level that humans have to step in or don't have to step in, right? So if you look at the model framework, there is a classification of basically two axes, right? One is the severity of harm, and one is the likelihood or probability of harm. So if you have a use case that has a high probability of harm and high severity of harm, then you may want to have a human in the loop so that you can have an extra check, extra layer of check. So, for example, I go to the example of in banking financial use cases, right? Credit loaning. So using an AI systems to automate credit loaning. If you deprive a person of credit, that person life could change, because you are depriving that person of being able to set up his or her business or to buy his or her car or a house or something. So that is potentially high risk, potentially quite a lot of risk. So you need to have a human involved. But if you're talking about, on Amazon, you're talking about Facebook, the recommendation systems that push out what you're going to watch next on Netflix or what products you want to buy. I mean, if they get it wrong, so what, right? I will go and look for my own product. So no big deal. So maybe for that one, I don't need a human in the loop. So I can have it as a human out of the loop. Okay, so that's the second one. The third one is operations management. So this is where you deal with the engineering aspects, right? You're looking at first, in terms of the data, you need to make sure that you have high, good data quality. You need to make sure that you have representative data. You need to make sure that in your data set, you minimize the amount of bias that you have in the data, like representation bias, and so on, right? Then you also have things like having to have proper data provenance. So you're able to prove, what that means is that you're able to prove where your data came from. You're able to show where your data came from, what are your data sources, are they trustworthy, and so on. And then looking at the model aspect as well, there are certain things that you can do, certain things to ensure explainability, certain things to ensure auditability, certain things to ensure reproducibility and robustness. So the idea is that, so explainability, I think everyone should know, right? Which is a level up from transparency. Can you explain how an AI decision was made, right? In a way that is sensible to the listening person. Auditability is for a party to be able to go in and check the AI system, see how it works, and usually best is done by a third party. Then robustness, reproducibility is along the same lines as auditability. And then you have robustness, which is ensuring that your AI system is able to perform with unexpected input, right? So if your AI is supposed to determine whether, again, going back to the example of finance, whether a person, a male or female, is able to get a loan, if you throw it a data regarding a child, is it able to give you a sensible input? Or will it give you some nonsensical garbage? Like it actually thinks that a child is able to get $1 million loan, for example. That's robustness, right? So that means you need to test your AI systems with different parameters, having adversarial AI, making sure that you can test it with parameters that are not included within the original data set, right? So that's operations management. And then the final one is stakeholder interaction and communication. You already take the AI model within your organization. And then when you are going out using it by your employees, by your customers, to what extent do you share your policies with them? To what extent do you share it in a way that makes sense? And one of the things that we said is it needs to be context-based, based on your purpose, your context, and your audience, right? And you will see that inside the model framework. So, for example, if you're an organization and you just want to you're using AI on your mobile app and you want to ask your users to just simply use and use the app, you don't need to share your entire source code, right? Or all the data sets that you trained it with to the customer. You just need to let them know that, look, we are using AI systems to generate some of the recommendations, and some of the data that we use was based on past data that you use on this and these services, for example. But if a person wants to challenge your decision, then maybe you need to share a little bit more. For example, okay, you were given this decision because 90% of people within your demographic, your age, your gender, your profile, etc., made decisions in this way. Or rather, the decision was made in this way. So we class you in that category also. Right? Then the final stage is, okay, if a regulator wants to come in and look into your system, they want to audit. If a court needs to have documents, okay, then that one, no choice, you have to give full and frank disclosure, right? You will need to share what data went into your system, how you trained it, how you tested it, maybe even share the source code, right? So it's a different risk. And the idea is to assure developers and deployers in Singapore and those who are using the model framework that, look, it's not everything is doom and gloom. The moment something wrong with your AI system, we are going to whack and going to ask you to share all your source code. It is a staged thing, right? Only in the worst case scenario, then we ask you, but most of the time we won't, right? So that's the idea for stakeholder interaction and communication. So I think this model framework overall was quite a practical document and was quite well received. We are quite thankful that it was well received. The idea was to encourage adoption and was responsible AI in Singapore, but I think we were very humbled to receive like a UN prize and also be asked to go to Paris to present about the model framework. So I was the officer who had to go to Paris, right? I was the staffing officer for our deputy commissioner, Zikin. So I had to go there, I had to sell koyo, have to say, use this model framework, very nice one, right? Very good to use. Then I had to go and run to the printer in Paris to go and print out, the documents. Anyway, that was a very good memory. Okay, so the model framework is one aspect, okay? Then the second leg of the chair, and I'll go through the next couple of legs a bit more quickly, is an advisory council. So this advisory council, I think quite common to all governments, they want a committee that's able to advise them on what they're doing, right? So this advisory council comprises people from the private sector, from, of course, big tech companies, from the big companies, from universities to academia, civil society, from your SMEs, from your government, also other agencies. So they come together and they discuss, and then they see what's next for Singapore or what does the market need in Singapore, right? And then they suggest what's the next steps that we can do. And of course, if PDPC has any initiatives that they come up with, then this advisory council will also advise and say, okay, this is what more I think you should do, or yeah, I think it's pretty good, you can go ahead. So this is the advisory council. Then the third one is the research program, right? We are looking at adoption now for many of the things that we're looking at, short-term or maybe short-term, medium-term. But we also need to look at some of the long-term impacts of AI systems that I would say that, frankly, even now as a society, we don't have a good grasp. So until today, and this has been the way since 2016, 2017, we still don't have the answer of, if there is a driverless vehicle and it knocks down a pedestrian, who is responsible? We don't have an answer, right? So the idea for this research program was to house it in the university. The academics can think long-term. They can engage with the policymakers. They can engage with the tech companies to come up with some draft answers, okay? So that when the really comes to a point in time where driverless vehicles are deployed in Singapore and they touch wood, they really knock down somebody, then what are some of the plans that Singapore can do? So we will pull out these drawer plans from the drawer, and then say, okay, at least we have a basic framework to follow. So we will think about some of these more complex issues, legal issues, policy, ethical governance issues, things like IP, right? When AI generates something, who owns the IP? If the content defames someone, how should defamation laws apply? Liability, responsibility, and so on. And of course, the added bonus is that if some of these things they are adopted internationally, then of course it benefits Singapore. Okay, then now I move to the next stage, right? So this was, I'm setting the context, 2019, 2020, I was in the PDPC, we already rolled out the second edition of the model framework. And we were thinking, what's next? Right? So at this point in time, in 2020 and 2021, then we started to hear rumors. What were these rumors? We heard rumors that the EU was going to start regulating AI. There was going to be an EU AI Act. So to us, this changed the game fundamentally. Because in the past, there was no threat of regulation, but now you have EU, and EU's regulation, of course, right, extraterritorial, is going to impact developers and deployers outside of the EU as well. And in fact, it's going to affect deployers and developers in ASEAN, in Singapore. So what can Singapore do to address some of these? Well, we're not going to introduce our own legislation. Again, we are still going with the light touch kind of regulatory approach. But how can we respond? So we were thinking very long internally, and this was during COVID. So we got a lot of time to think. Okay. So in the end, we think, then we realized that, okay, what we can do, and an area that has not been developed yet, is AI governance testing, right? EU can come up with their regulation, but ultimately, when you come to regulation, you want to implement your regulation, you want to enforce it. How to enforce? You need to check, right? You need to check the AI systems. So we realized that, okay, the conversation in this aspect is still very early, it's still very nascent. I think we can do something to maybe help Singapore plant the flag in this area. So that's how work started out on AI Verify. I won't go into too much detail about how we actually developed it, but the whole idea for AI Verify, and listen to me for this, is this. AI Verify allows you to test your AI systems with a independent third party, so not related to the regulator, right? And the idea is that because it's not done by the regulator, there is a degree of independence, and also when companies have to, let's say, test their AI systems with the independent assessor, um, um, they won't have the fear that, oh, your regulator is going to check on your AI system and they're going to know all your dirty laundry, right? So that's one degree of separation. The second thing is that this AI Verify does not claim to assess ethical principles. So just because you put your AI system through AI Verify doesn't mean that your AI system is declared to be ethical or declared to be safe or whatever. What it does is that um, if you have claimed your AI system to have done like achieve a certain level, so let's say a certain metric, a certain standard, right? You test with AI Verify, and AI Verify double confirms that you can achieve that metric. Then you can go to your customers and you say, I said my AI system performs like this. I tested with AI Verify, it does perform like this, so you can trust what I say. That is the purpose of AI Verify, right? If one analogy for this is kind of like how the Food and Drug Administration in the US tests for drugs. What they do is that they don't actually test the drugs themselves. FDA doesn't test the drugs themselves. They will they will provide with a testing framework. Then they ask the companies to go and test themselves. And then at the end of the day, the companies will send the test results plus how they tested to the regulator. The regulator checks and says, you complied with how we are supposed to test the result. Okay, you can sell your drug to the market. So for example, when you buy Panadol, it doesn't claim that Panadol is safe for all purposes. It says that Panadol is safe within these parameters. And then you as the user, basically buyer beware, right? The burden is on the buyer. So the idea for the AI Verify is the same thing. It acts as that third party check. So this was rolled out, I think sometime mid last year. And then earlier this year, they announced that they were setting up an AI Verify Foundation, which is basically a non-profit company that is separate from PDPC to implement AI Verify, to run AI Verify. And the idea is to open source the AI Verify code so that more companies can use it, everyone can use it, everyone can take it and try. So can implement more also lah, because I think you need to also encourage more discussions about AI standards and AI metrics and indices. So that's AI Verify. Okay. Okay, this essentially is what I just explained. So help businesses build trust with stakeholders, facilitate interoperability, because the idea is that if you can use AI Verify for not just the EU AI Act, but also China's let's say like, for example, their own AI regulation, or Canada or Brazil, right? Instantly, when let's say a Singapore company tests with AI Verify and you achieve a certain metric, technically you're able to then start operating in EU, in Canada, in Brazil, and so on. So you get this interoperability. And then also to develop international standards and to foster a local kind of like AI testing community. Okay, so this was the slides that I had in relation to the overall framework for AI governance in Singapore. I know I'm running short of time, but I want to give a quick word on what has been the impact of generative AI. Okay, so do bear with me. And I think I want to share this with you because it is part of what we said in the box that I was going to present today. Okay, so generative AI, I don't need to say much about it, right? But it's a wave that the effects we continue to feel today. So in late 2022, OpenAI, ChatGPT, they went from being relatively unknown to the fastest growing digital platform in early 2023. And this development really caught everyone by surprise, including regulators like the PDPC. So late last year, the priority for many regulators was things like children's privacy. But the way that generative AI grew meant that for a lot of the regulators, they shifted their priorities towards AI this year. So many of the initiatives that you're seeing today is the result of this shift. Now, PDPC also realized that they had to do something with AI because there were still big questions. For example, I mentioned about the light touch regulatory approach. Is it still relevant in the age of generative AI? Because now there's widespread adoption, right? So there's no need to worry about adoption anymore. It's widespread now. Everyone is using it. Second is the idea for adoption was to better understand some of the risks in adopting AI. Again, because it's widespread adoption, the risks are now very, very real, you know. So there is a need to think about, I think the PDPC is actively thinking about, does this change our internal regulatory position? Do we need to have guardrails? And if so, how do we do it in a way that does not introduce like a sudden surprise, a sudden shock on the system? So what the PDPC did in July this year was to release two things, on June and July. The first was a draft set of advisory guidelines on personal data and AI systems. So these advisory guidelines are a regulatory tool used by PDPC. They are non-binding, but they are PDPC's interpretation of our Personal Data Protection Act, PDPA. So it's non-binding, but because the PDPC uses it as its interpretation, of course, when they're investigating you for breach, and if you didn't follow the advisory guidelines, you better have a very good reason for not following the guidelines. I also just want to say that these advisory guidelines, when they came out dealing with personal data in AI systems, it wasn't with generative AI in mind. They were thinking about it already, but I think generative AI surely had some impact. They edited it based on, you know, some of the impact generative AI had. So this advisory guidelines cover three things: development, testing, and monitoring, then deployment, as well as procuring. Again, in the interest of time, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think you can read this document on your own. The second initiative that they came up with is a discussion paper from the IMDA developed together with the AI Verify Foundation, which this one specifically deals with generative AI. And I think it highlights some of the benefits of generative AI. It highlights how generative AI works and some of the risks, right? And these risks include hallucinations and what they call confabulation, privacy and confidentiality, misinformation, cyber threats, copyright challenges, and then biases. So it also suggests some ways on how to deal with this generative AI. Things like, you know, accountability, more higher quality data use in terms of assurance and evaluation and so on. Now, these are not steps that are set in stone, but I think it shows that there's been some thinking in PDPC and in IMDA, the Infocom Media Development Authority, on how to deal with generative AI. So not everything you will see it solidify into an initiative, but I think IMDA and PDPC will work internally or together with other government agencies or even with overseas partners to set in stone some of the things that they suggest in the discussion paper. But I think this is a really fast-moving space, so we're not sure what will come up from this eventually. And so I think these are the two initiatives that I want to flag that happened recently. Now, then the final thing I want to say is, of course, there is the ASEAN AI framework, right? Which I think is very important. So this is something that we will likely see in the early part of next year. It will be a whole of ASEAN AI framework guiding document that provides guidance not just to organizations, but also to regulators and how we can do things, you know, as a whole regionally. And I think that will be an interesting document as well to hopefully, you know, spread more awareness in terms of AI governance throughout the whole of ASEAN. Okay, I know, you know, this was meant to be like a 30-minute presentation. I kind of exceeded, become like 35, 40 minutes, but because there's really a lot to cover from 2016 all the way to present day. and there's going to be more to cover going forward. But I think it's useful to put a pause here, and just want to say again that, we in Singapore are very keen to learn from the experiences of other countries in ASEAN, including Indonesia, what you guys are doing. I personally am following things like the PDP law very closely and what Cominfo is doing. And for me personally, I'm also very happy to continue sharing some of the Singapore experiences in Indonesia as well, so that we can learn from this journey together. I think all of us, we must ultimately adopt the approach of AI systems. We must continue to learn. We must continue to test ourselves, become better like an AI system. That's the only way that we can, continue to evolve against the constant progress of technology. So on that note, I pause here and I hand the time back to Matthias.
Okay, thank you, Josh, for the comprehensive presentation. I believe that some of the initiatives has inspired some of the government officials who joined this forum to implement some of their ongoing policy initiative within their organization. So before we start the Q&A, I would like to set some kind of guardrails for all the audience here. So if you would like to ask your question directly, please just unmute yourself and raise your hand so I can reach out to you and give some time for you to ask some question to Josh. If you don't feel comfortable to ask directly, you can type into the chat box so I can read it for you, and Josh will answer it directly to you in this session. So without further ado, I would like to open the Q&A session. If there's anyone who would like to ask, please raise your hand. Oh, we have one question from the chat box side. It's from Pak Eko Widodo. Hello, Pak Eko. So I will read it for you, Josh. So historically, technological developments have not always been beneficial for human development. Every new technology always creates quite high inequality in society. Spinning machines during the first industrial revolution caused misery for factory workers. AI will and bring its own gaps. All artificial intelligence technologies are developed by large companies. Then who protects the interests of small people from the interests of large companies that have AI itself? This is a good question. I think just what do you think about it?
Yes, I think it's a very, very good question. And it goes down ultimately to societal inequality, right? This is not a question that is unique just to AI. I think you can say that the same challenges arise with blockchain, arises with 5G, it arises with immersive technologies, metaverse, and so on. So it's not just specific to AI. But I think that in today's context, today's day and age, I think there is a lot more consciousness that the impact of technologies can be different from segment to segment, from company to company, from person to person. So there is a lot of work that is going on to also bridge the digital divide in different ways, right? I think definitely a lot of it has to come from the initiative, right? It has to be the role of the government, because the government acts as a body that is able to set a level platform, to set the level playing field for all players as much as possible. Now, the thing is that you cannot take away differences in treatment. You cannot take away all inequality. That's just not possible, because you would require a disproportionate amount of effort to make sure that everyone is on the same level together. But I think governments can play a part in making sure that the worst of inequalities are taken away, right? So we may not be able to change the power difference between large companies and small companies or individuals, but we can at least, and the governments can at least provide some avenue so that the individuals are not completely left out of the picture. So for example, in terms of individual, providing digital education, providing digital literacy, so that there is a greater awareness of how these AI systems work, and how can you take basic steps to gain a better control of your personal data, or to protect your privacy, right? Knowing how your personal data is being used by these companies that are training AI systems, I think gives you some control. It gives you some degree of leverage. And of course, knowing how to use these AI systems means that, even individual coders now, individual developers can also develop their own, basic AI systems. They can develop their own code. So sometimes even generative AI may be one of the levelers as well when it comes to this. For a small company, yes, they may not have the wherewithal to collect all these large data sets. But then the question is whether the government can introduce, trusted public data sets that all small companies can use to develop their own internal AI systems, right? I think that is something that the Singapore government has been doing as well. I think PDPC has been involved in that. I think on the financial side, they've also been involved in that as well. So these are just some ways that I think we can make sure that the worst of inequalities are taken away. But certainly it's a huge, I think, challenge going forward, and there will not be one solution to address everything. It just needs to be an evolving conversation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for the answer, Josh. I hope it answers all the inquiries from Pak Eko Widodo. So we have another question from Pak Aris Hartono. Mr. Lee, Josh, perhaps you could share how the financial service industry companies in Singapore cooperate with Monetary Authority of Singapore in developing and implementing AI technology in FSI system. Thanks. You can just share some practical from your experience, I think, for this one.
Okay, thanks, Pak Aris, because this is also a good question that actually reminds me of something that I forgot to mention during my presentation earlier. I mentioned about the regulators roundtable. So all the regulators were meeting together to discuss how best to regulate AI. And I think, or to govern AI rather, I don't want to use the word regulation. And I think the approach that they came up with was to adopt a more sector-specific approach because different industries will have different requirements and different risks when it comes to using AI. So while PBPC's model AI governance framework, it sets the baseline, they call it a sector agnostic framework. That means that don't care whatever sector you use, the model framework will give you some general guidelines that you can use regardless of where your company is in. But individual sector regulators are encouraged to develop their own sector guidance or regulatory framework for their own individual sector. So one perfect example that you just raised is the financial industry. MAS, which is the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which regulates the financial industry here, developed its own set principles that it felt was the most appropriate for AI in the financial industry. And these you might probably already know. It's called the FEAT principle, FEAT: fairness, explainability, accountability, and transparency. So basically, to MAS, they were of the view that these were the 4 key principles that were most important in the use of AI in the financial industry, right? So they developed their own guidelines based on that, how financial companies can adopt these different principles. And they also have their own Veritas framework, which is kind of like how do I explain it? It's a mathematical model that allows you to calculate or derive and get a mathematical understanding of fairness within the financial sector. So this Veritas framework is something that I think they've also been trialing with many of the big financial industry companies in Singapore as well. The idea here is, if you look at a model framework, it's like a multi-plug extension. Your extension plug, you can plug on different appliances to it. So that's the idea. You have a framework across the board, which is the model framework, the multi-plug, and then as a sector, you can tag on your own framework to it. So that's how this is supposed to work in Singapore. It's slot in like this, like a cartridge. So that's my understanding. I'm really sorry that I can't share more color or more detail because I personally am not that familiar with the financial industry as well. But that's my understanding based on my time in the PDPC last time.
Right. Thank you, Josh. So is there any other question from the audience? If not, I would like to ask a question to Josh. Pardon about that. So Josh, you said before that there are lots of initiatives from the Singapore side in order to create an AI ecosystem based on the policy-based evidence. And I think one of the key hurdles in Indonesia, and I believe some of the audience here could understand what I'm about to say as well, is the bureaucracy and the challenge of coordination lots of government institutions to be in the one integrated view and hopefully one integrated executions in order to create AI governance according to the country's goal. And it is something that Indonesia is a struggle, not only in AI sector, but almost all technology sectors as we are experiencing that as well. So I'm quite surprised that there are quite, I can see from your presentation, it's quite inclusive collaboration between the government and also the other stakeholders outside the government sector. How did Singapore do that in the first place? Was it because of it's part of the culture before, or was it there another say pioneer regulatory approach before AI that Singapore shouldn't have no other challenge in implementing the same collaboration? Because we Indonesia, we are promoting the quadruple helix approach. I think you quite believe in that, and it is quite a challenging one. So I think it is something that we would like to learn, especially from the relationship between the government institution and the private, in order to harmonize AI governance in Singapore. What is your answer and thought about that?
Thanks. It's a very good question, and I want to be careful here in answering this question because I don't want to make it seem like the Singapore government is very adept and very effective at solving its own challenges. I'm very, very aware that the Indonesian government, actually all governments in ASEAN, have their own unique challenges as well, and what may be workable or what may have worked in the Singapore context may not necessarily work in the Indonesian context, but I think we can share notes. So the Singapore government system from a long time back, I think they've always had this approach that everything that they deal with needs to have a whole of government kind of approach. I think for me, the first time in my life that I heard this thing called whole of government was really from Singapore. And then I started to see other countries around the world start saying also whole of government, whole of government. But it is possible in Singapore partly because the public sector is very small. And it's therefore, comparatively speaking, much easier to collaborate, right? When things are smaller, just less number of people. And then there is also the whole way that it works. This is based on my experience, not just in PTPC, but also when I was in the Ministry of Law, is that often at the higher levels, the PermSecs, when I say PermSec, I mean the permanent secretaries, the deputy secretaries, even the political office holders like the ministers, they have a lot of committees, interagency, inter-ministry kind of committees, where they can all come together and discuss, right? I don't know whether this is the right word to use, but they pack together, okay? So there are a lot of these abilities. So even though at an officer level, so like me as a junior officer, when I talk to another officer in another ministry, we may not be able to come to an agreement. Never mind, we will escalate within our own agencies. When it goes up all the way up to the permanent secretary or go up to the minister, they can discuss, then they can work things out. Then they work things out, it comes down to the two of us, right? Okay, then we know what the way forward to work together. But we can do it this way because we are smaller, right? So it's easier to maneuver. I think that's one thing. But I think the second, I also want to say that it's not like everything is perfect in the Singapore government. Just like in any government, I would say, I think there are different agencies that want to have their own priorities put in front, right? They want to make sure that that the pie is theirs, and if you are another agency, you don't anyhow encroach on my territory. But if this is not part of my territory, this problem is not part of my issue, I don't want your pasar, right? So these kind of things, honestly, every government will face on because this is not a government problem. This is a people kind of problem. It is in the nature of people to act like this. So Singapore itself is not immune to this, but I think there are two factors at play. One is this whole idea of a whole of government approach. It is, I think, part of the way that they evaluate some of the officers, especially the senior officers, is how they are able to address issues at an interagency level. So are you able to bring along other people, at your level, as a senior director, senior officer, to see eye to eye to address some of these conflicts? And then I think the second thing, especially in the space of AI, is that look, it's so fast moving. You fight here, fight there, fight here, fight there. you fight until 1 year later, the technology already advanced already. So what's the point of fighting? The better way is to work closer together so that everyone can be on the same page, right? And learn from each other. And on the point of learning, I think it also helps that there is a lot of training programs within the Singapore government. So especially in the case of AI, a lot of public officers are trained in terms of coding, in terms of what is AI, how to deal with it. So there's a basic level of literacy within these government agencies. When the officers talk about AI, they agak-agak, they know what we're talking about, so it won't be lost in translation. And I think that helps with communication as well. So those are just some things based on my experience. I'm sure there are many, many other things which I wasn't able to see back then as a junior officer. But I hope, we can continue to learn from each other's experiences because like I said, a lot of these challenges, it's not just Singapore, it's not just Indonesia. It's, everyone faces these same issues. Matthias, you on mute?
Yeah. Right. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for the answer. Just another question about the other topic. So I've seen that Singapore at this moment don't want to create a specific AI regulation different than some of the countries or even the regional organizations such as European Union. And one of the key things that I found during my research in my daily works, not only Singapore but several countries who has taken the same approach, is they would like to assess their applicability of existing laws regarding AI related that they already have in order to justify whether such laws is still applied to the AI or not, and then whether after that they may create a decision whether they would like to create a specific AI regulation or not. So from your point of view as a legal expert and a practitioner in legal field, from the Singapore law perspective, is Singapore ready enough to keep using this kind of approach by utilizing more coordination within the government institutions and also applying the existing laws and updating the laws regarding AI and making some of guidelines or soft laws products in order to enhance innovation and also on the other hand to address some of the risks that may affect humans or Singaporeans there. So what is the background of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that really whether this is going to be the right approach or not, which is to take a more incremental, accretive kind of approach. No one really knows whether it's going to be the right answer, right? Because ultimately the technology could develop in ways that we can't anticipate now. We don't know what we don't know. But I think the approach right now is the one that makes sense because at least it doesn't surprise investors, it doesn't surprise companies, it doesn't shock the system. And I think that's what we want to avoid, right? So we don't want to scare people away and then they end up going outside of Singapore. So it has to be this. I think the second element to that is in terms of when you're talking about laws, right? Ultimately, Singapore is a common law system. So the common law always takes the perspective that the law should be developed incrementally, right? You shouldn't just introduce a new law like that, but you should look at past principles, how they dealt with certain issues, and then how they can apply to this new issue that you're dealing with. So I think that is also part of the element as to why we are taking a more incremental approach to things. But just looking at things now, I do think that a lot of the laws, there are a lot of laws now today, if you think about it, that apply to AI, right? Personal data protection laws, they technically apply to AI systems. Why shouldn't they? IP laws apply to AI systems. It's just that maybe there's not enough regulatory clarity yet, but they do technically apply to AI systems. I don't think any regulator would go out there and say, our IP Copyright Act does not apply to AI systems. I think everyone will be shocked. Your laws like contracts, your tort laws, your criminal laws, all of them, they can technically apply to AI systems. I think what we just need is that you need a bit more clarity as to how they apply, how exactly should the principles apply, how should some of the pronouncements that are made by the courts apply in the context of AI systems? So until we are clear that even with regulatory clarity, there are still some answers that we cannot answer because of the current legal framework. Until that point, I think we should adopt still a more incremental and accretive kind of approach. Because, like I said, AI does not exist in a lawless vacuum. We need to do our due diligence first to make sure that we know where exactly does it apply and what's the limit to which our law can apply to, let's say, generative AI systems. And then only if we find that there is a delta, there is a gap, then we see whether there is a need for amending our legislation or to introduce new legislation, right? So let's not adopt a knee-jerk kind of reaction to this. So that's one of the things that FPF, my organization, is currently doing. We are working on a year-long project that assesses some of the governance framework for AI across the APAC region. And we're looking at what is the delta between those frameworks and generative AI, right? And to see whether there's any gaps that need to be addressed. So I'll give one example. For the model framework, I go back to the model framework. One of the things they say is that before you release your AI system into the wild, you need to make sure that your data is, you minimize the amount of bias within the data. Okay, sure, sounds good in previous generations of AI systems. How do you do that for AI, generative AI systems that are trained on, the World Wide Web of data? There's so much data. How are you going to minimize all kinds of bias in that data? So that is, I think, one of the challenges. That's what we mean by the delta. So I think we are still in a stage where we are researching and we are looking at perhaps potential like technical or policy approaches that companies and governments can take to deal with these differences. But fundamentally, to answer your question, incremental approach, I think, is still the best way forward for now.
Is it because AI is still evolving?
Yes, and there's that as well. There is definitely that picture as well. You set in stone a piece of AI regulation now. What happens if 5 months down the road something new gets added on? And I think the EU, they have done a lot of thinking on this, so I don't mean to put it in a way that demeans or belittles what they do. But I'm just saying it as a fact, right? They came out with the EU AI Act, or they were discussing about the EU AI Act before generative AI came out. Then suddenly, when generative AI came out, suddenly there's this huge argument, there's this huge discussion about, oh, should we include generative AI inside the EU AI Act? Should we include foundational AI models? What's the approach that we're going to take? You see, that's the exact point that you're making, Matthias. When a new technology comes along, are you going to suddenly tear up the whole rule book? How are you going to struggle to add it in? So a more incremental approach is probably a more practical one at this point in time, to me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Josh. I would like to pass it on to the other audience who would like to speak. Is there anyone to raise the question, perhaps from the EIS management team? If you have some question, because you are the communities, right? You manage the community, so it will be better. It will be best if you can ask some question to Josh right now. Perhaps Pahenka, maybe you have some question to Josh.
Yeah, I do. Josh, it seems like this is in the upcoming AI Safety Summit in UK, right? This coming November. It seems like all the chatter is about this existential risk, like this a very dangerous thing, and even like the Prime Minister already said it, or that safety is number one, humanity, and all that stuff. Is that conversation taking away the urgency of something more prevalent to the development of AI in the society at large? Like the discrimination issue, the bias, and all that stuff, because there's a big gap between that, right? And this existential risk that they're talking about is also driven mostly by companies, and that seems it was fed to the regulators to drive it, so they don't look at like something close, but something, in my point of view, is a bit far away. And the urgency is like less so, right? And it goes into like the end is like it is as if they're pushing for a closed system AI, closed source AI instead of an open AI system, right? What do you think about it? I know my question is a bit like a very broad, right? But the point is like, is a closed AI system is better? Is the existential risk is that near to us? That is something that they really want to brought in like now. Essentially, that's kind of like my question is about.
Okay. I think it's a good question. But frankly, I haven't been following the discussions in the UK or in that part of the world that closely about things like existential risk, because especially for me as a former policymaker, and this was in the time of like 2017, 2018, 2019. Still, there were a lot of discussions about existential risk. I mean, if you open any newspaper at the back in that time and you see the word AI in the headlines, usually, right, confirm almost 90%, there'll be a comparison with Terminator, Matrix, or Odyssey 2001, right? The HAL, HAL
Yeah,
2001. All these very, movie-like kind of artificial general intelligence systems. And my policy maker kind of like background and training tells me to be a bit skeptical lah, okay? Let's look at the problems they need to address now, rather than looking at all these, challenges that are like far out in the future. I mean, back in 2017, 2018, they had these researchers come together, and I think when they were talking about whether AGI, artificial general intelligence, is gonna come about, I think the kind of number that they gave in terms of the year was something like 2053. I mean, there's still, even if that is true, we are still about 30 years away from that. So let's focus on some of the issues now. So I hear you, and I agree with your sentiments. And again, this is a rather closed door discussion with a small group. So I hope to be able to be a bit more candid with you. We need to see also what are some of these discussions about? What is the background behind these discussions? What are they really trying to do, right? A lot of this positioning about, oh, we need to think about the greater benefit for humanity, how AI systems exist for humanity. It's all good. It's very good. I mean, I think it's very positive kind of conversation. But what exactly is the UK trying to do? I think there are many different jurisdictions now. AI is a hot topic, many jurisdictions involved. The EU is leading the charge on regulations. Of course, we can't miss out US and China. I'm sure the UK would also be interested to have its, rightful place in the countries that are, the front runners when you're thinking about AI governance, when you're thinking about AI regulation. So, that I don't want to go more. I will leave you to come up with your own conclusions as to why they are trying to do this. But I think we need to see it in context, lah, right? And not just say, oh, AI is gonna kill all of humanity. Yeah. Let's make sure we follow that discussion. I think having a bit of pragmatism in that also, while looking at some of the issues that are right now really burning issues like data protection, privacy issues, solving the IP issue, which is a real big headache. I think for me, my preference would be to focus on that.
I agree. Thank you, Josh, for your answer.
Okay, thank you, Pak Hengka. Anyone else who would likes to speak? Maybe okay. Okay. Actually I have another question just for you. It's more like I would like to know what's next for the AI governance in Singapore. What Singapore is doing right now regarding AI. Is there any kind of upgraded AI verify, and is there another initiative in policy making process in Singapore, or maybe the establishment of specific AI authority, because the authority board is something that Indonesia is still considering on, especially some of the government institutions think that by establishing a specific AI regulatory board, it could exacerbate some of the bureaucracy process that they're suffering with. And then most importantly, to have some kind of unified and integrated steps and execution among a government institution under their belt. So what will be next for Singapore right now, if we may know?
I'll answer that question in two parts. The first part is to deal specifically with your point, the second point first regarding potentially setting up a new AI agency. I don't think in Singapore there are any plans right now to set up an AI agency to regulate AI systems because number one, there is no AI regulation. I don't think there's any plan to introduce any kind of AI regulation, like AI specific regulation in place. I haven't heard of anything like that. And the second is, it touches on a point that I just saw on LinkedIn today, which I thought was quite a good point. There are a lot of jurisdictions around the world thinking about setting up a new AI regulatory body. And I think that's fair. Every jurisdiction will have its own concerns. They will have their own prerogative on deciding how they want to manage their own government institutions. But I think besides thinking about whether or not we should set up a new agency, I think an equally important question to ask is, do we currently have the capacity or capability for our current institutions? Can we strengthen the capacity and capabilities of our current institutions in enforcing things like data protection, enforcing things like IP, before we even think about setting up something new? Right? So that's, I think, a good consideration to have. It's both are equally important. Both need to be considered together at the end of the day. But I would say that I think sometimes we also need to pay attention to the second question as well, which is just as important because that comes down to the enforcement. It comes down to the capability, it's the tangible things, the tangible result. Okay. Now, in terms of the question of what's next for Singapore, I think there are a few things that we can probably predict on the horizon. Number one is I mentioned about the advisory guidelines for personal data and AI systems just now. They were released in draft form for a public consultation. So that public consultation has already ended. What I'm sure is probably going on now is that they are taking in the feedback from the public consultation. They are probably reworking some parts of the advisory guidelines, probably consulting with other agencies and doing some of their own closed consultations as well. So maybe at an appropriate juncture, maybe next year, they will likely share, the finalized advisory guidelines. I don't know whether it's next year or later this year, but I think more realistic would be next year, because I don't see any events that they can announce the official release of the advisory guidelines yet. I think on the AI Verify front, they've already set up the AI Verify Foundation. So the idea is to get more buy-in, get more stakeholders on board to join the AI Verify Foundation to use it. I think there are also probably a lot more discussions going on about how to encourage that interoperability between AI Verify and EU AI Act, Brazil, Canada, China, and other jurisdictions, maybe even the US NIST framework, also the NIST framework. So those discussions could be going on in the background. And I think we can be sure that for the generative AI discussion paper, I think they're probably thinking about maybe potentially implementing some of the ideas within the discussion paper. Things like maybe watermarking or labeling of content that's raised by generative AI. I don't know whether, again, like I said just now, right? I don't know how much of these content will actually be implemented, but I'm sure there are discussions internally to see which one is the most feasible first going forward. So all that is to say that this space is still going to evolve. I think we will watch this space closely, and who knows, maybe this time next year we have a similar conversation. I will have more to share.
That's great.
Great.
Just a
Pankaj,
quick
do you have
one.
something else?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Just a quick take on, do you think the IP law and especially with what's going on in the art world, right? Like in the Hollywood and in the book writing and art and all that stuff. Do you think the IP law needs to change with the generative AI becoming like something so prevalent in today's world? Or we can still apply, like you said, like the principle of the IP law is still applicable to whatever like generative AI brings.
I have no answer to that. I'm not an IP law expert. I'll be frank with you. I mean, all I can remember now is that the US recently there had a court ruling that said that even if it's generative AI generated content, you cannot own the copyright. There is no copyright in that because it needs to be human generated, and human generated does not mean just entering a prompt and then the generative AI generates something for you. You will not own the IP in that. So
Okay.
yeah, I think akan datang. Really no answer. I don't have an answer, like, at least. I'm sure the academics out there will have some sort of answer, but I personally don't have an answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
to answer Matthias' question, one more thing to probably look forward to is, so next year, as we know, there will be the ASEAN Digital Ministers Meeting, ADMM, early next year. I'm sure that there will probably be some announcements on the ASEAN AI framework also, because next year Singapore is the chair of the ADMM. So Singapore is also probably driving efforts on that front more to right now coordinate the ASEAN AI framework, then see whether we can adopt it next year.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you, just for the answers. Just a closing question for me. From your, we've learned so much about Singapore in terms of AI governance and also the execution of its policies or supporting initiative by the government. And I'm going to shift a bit more from legal perspective to innovation perspective, because lots of our researchers and developers are joining in this session. One of the key challenges for all developers in AI here in Indonesia is to getting the proper data sets lawfully. And one of the hurdles is there are no regulation that supports that kind of action. So for example, lots of developers or AI researchers in Indonesia, they have some kind of option whether they have to go through one by one with the data owners and ask for some certain of the consent or agreements to get their data sets, or they might do scrapping or crawling, which is quite riskier than doing the legally one, that like I just mentioned before. Just a quick question, Josh. Has Singapore enacted any kind of initiative, policies, or act regarding data access between public and private sector? And if yes or no, if yes, is it quite implemented well in Singapore? If no, is there any kind of support from the government to say accommodating this important research?
I think that I'm as far as I'm aware. Okay, this is an area, frankly, that I'm not following as closely. But there is the Public Sector Governance Act in Singapore that regulates and governs the use of data, the use of data within public institutions. And I think there probably is some provision on how data sharing is to be conducted between public and private entities. I think there is also this thing called the IM8 Instruction Manual number 8, which is a set of internal guidelines within the government on how they should use data internally with the government, and it probably also might have something to do with sharing with data outside of the government institution. So that's what I know. And I'm also aware that there are some initiatives to allow the sharing of trusted data between the public sector. So making available like large data set containing personal data, but personal data that has been anonymized, that has been the bias has been minimized as far as possible, and so on. I think there's some initiatives on that front, but off the top of my head, I can't give you a more detailed answer than that. But I would also say that uh, part of the issue for the private sector in getting data is also not just from the public sector, but also being able to gain their own data, right? So one of the things that the advisory guidelines actually does deal with is what are some of the legal bases that you can use in your personal data protection law in the PDPA to appropriately use data for training AI systems. So for example, the advisory guidelines clarify that you can use content from data subjects, that's one. Second, you can use this thing called the business improvement expectation. So you don't need to seek content when you are using data as an organization for developing or enhancing a product. But of course, there are safeguards that apply. Then there is the research exception. So when organizations are conducting R&D activities that may not immediately impact their product, you can also use data, personal data, without having to seek consent. But then there are also safeguards that the advisory guidelines ask organizations to take, like ensuring that there are technical and process and legal controls for data protection, de-identifying personal data, practicing data minimization, and bearing in mind things like the need for accountability. So for example, you need a DPO, you need to have proper internal policies and all that. So those are also steps to ensure that there are guardrails in place when private institutions or private entities go out and collect data to train AI systems.
Right. Thank you, Josh, for the answer. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or raise a question? If not, we can close the today's event. Okay, I think we're done here. So, first of all, I would like to say thank you for Josh for giving all the comprehensive explanations and say to give the best answers that we can use in our organization in Indonesia, either by the government side or the private sector. For me, one thing that I can learn from Josh is how to implement a progressive and incremental policy approach, which is in order to cover the best of the AI in order to foster its benefits and hopefully to cut after risks. And the way Singapore is doing right now is trying to elevate the current system and enhancing the several of the guidelines derived from the main policies that they just enacted years before or until this current date. And most importantly, the main important thing is we have to learn more on how to get the balance in our Indonesia policy ecosystem in order to foster innovation and also legal certainties and especially the protection from the society. So there will be more of this series of discussion with another renowned speaker. But today, let us give the utmost appreciation to Josh for today. Thank you, Josh, and
Thank you, Josh.
we look forward very soon to collaborating with you. And if there's anyone else, especially from the government official who would like to learn more from Josh and his organization, you may contact him, and we will share him. We will share you the slides and also the LinkedIn account if Josh okay. So all of you can reach out to him and make up some collaboration between Singapore and Indonesia. And I'm quite pushing the government official to have some kind of deliberate collaboration with Josh and his organization in Singapore. So thank you very much for joining. Have a great Friday and also have a great weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Goodbye
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank
Alright,
you.
cheers.
Terima kasih.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Terima kasih.
Bye.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Take care. Jaga
Take care.
baik.
Take care.
Hey.
Terima
Ya.
kasih semua. Sampai jumpa.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks, Josh. All right, later.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.